The Jewish celebration of Passover begins next week, and It's Relevant caught up with local Rabbi Daniel Cohen to discuss what it really means to keep kosher.
One of the busiest holidays of the year for the Jewish people is the holiday of Passover. Everyone is really focused on making sure they have all the right foods for the Passover Seder. It's a great experience when families come together. And if you walk in almost any supermarket, you always find not only a kosher aisle, but a kosher for Passover aisle. Matzah, we know, is a food that goes back many years ago when the Jews were in Egypt. We know the story, and they were liberated. And it says traditionally that when they were coming out of Egypt, they only had enough time for baking matzah, but not for bread to come out. And as a reminder of that, we make sure that during this 7-day, 8-day period, we don't eat any leavened products, which means anything that has in it wheat, oats, spelt, rye, or barley that is actually leavened and now has become bread. Judaism sees a holiday not merely as a historical commemoration, but as an experience that we go through. We have to touch some sort of deeper spiritual message. But Judaism says that really it's possible to be a slave to other things in life. We could be a slave to our own material needs, a slave to our own desires. But the whole holiday of Passover is really about teaching, how can I become the best that I can be? How can I be a free person, not to my body, but rather to my soul? A lot of the Passover foods are made under special supervision. So they make sure that there's absolutely no grains that come in there, and it doesn't have what we call chametz. Chametz is actually literally the food, a term that speaks about bread products within it. So many times you'll find a product that has not only a kosher symbol on it, but it'll have a P next to it. P means it tells you that it's good for Passover. Things, for example, like grape juice, wines, all those are kosher year-round and for Passover, but certainly a lot of the other products actually don't use flour, they use potato starch. And it actually kind of tastes very similar. You know, oftentimes people throw around the word Seder. What actually is a Seder? If you actually look in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, it says that every community has a responsibility to tell over the story of the Exodus from Egypt. What were the miracles? How are we taken out of slavery? What's God's presence in my life? So many years ago, it would actually just be a grandfather who sat down next to a grandson and said, okay, this is what happened. But then over time, there developed what's called a Haggadah. Haggadah is actually a book that everyone has. Maxwell House has made it famous, the Maxwell House Haggadah, that actually walks through everything that needs to be done. The word Seder means order. It means you can't just come to your meal and actually just say, where's the food? Let's start eating. There has to be an order and a process. So the Seder really is about going through different steps. Steps of making a blessing over wine. Steps of eating the matzah. The 4 questions. Telling the story. It's a night where we have a lot of show and tell. You know, in any faith, and certainly in Judaism, there's a notion of what am I receiving from my ancestors and what message do I want to give to my children, give to my grandchildren. And these are all just symbols to help us get a little more in touch with God's beneficence in our life and also making sure that everyone really appreciates the message of the holiday. One of the main messages of the holiday of Passover is this idea of sanctifying time. You know, we live in a world that actually has so many time-saving products, but at the same time we feel we have absolutely no time for anything. And Judaism says that make sure that you remove the slave mentality. You know, you can be a slave to Pharaoh in Egypt over 3,000 years ago, but you can also be a slave to your BlackBerry. You can be a slave to, you know, the TV around you because you don't actually use time for a holy purpose. That is also one of the messages of Passover. Because you know what separates chametz from matzah? Just 1 minute. It's flour and water. If you bake it within 18 minutes, it's matzah. If you allow it to bake longer, it turns into chametz. Hence you have the 18-minute matzah. Now 18 we know is a holy term. 18 means chai, life. But it also sometimes tells us that just 1 minute, you choose to do something, you choose not to. Are you distracted or are you engaged and present in the moment? That sometimes can make all the difference in the world between life and death. So one of the holidays of Passover, when you eat your matzah, is to think about how am I sanctifying time? Time is in our hands, the gift from God to hopefully make the most of it.
The rabbi that's here
Yes.
and I were discussing kosher for Passover
Right.
oil. I don't want to use olive oil because I don't want the flavor.
Yeah.
So I said canola oil, and he said no, it's not kosher for Passover.
Well, sometimes, for example, there are restrictions because it actually comes from some of the 5 grains, but also, for example, within Ashkenazic tradition, They're what are called kitniot, things we can't use from
Yeah.
different other types of, like the corn, the beans, and things like
But
that.
they allow quinoa, which is the grain.
Ah, so quinoa actually is a later product, actually, that is not by most authorities come under. It was not a part of the original decree. That's why it's permitted, actually.
Yeah.
What you see here are all square boxes. These are all machine-made matzah. But many people at their Seder like to use what's called handmade matzah. That's actually a round matzah. And whatever you use at your Seder is fine. They also have actually here egg matzah. Egg matzah actually should only be used by either children or people who may have a little difficulty chewing the matzah, but generally we should use the other matzahs for the holiday of Passover. Eating matzah is not just at the Seder night. Not only do we abstain from eating chametz during the holiday of Passover, but we also eat matzah every single day of Passover. I remember as a child growing up in Atlanta, we'd go to the Atlanta Braves games, and we would take our matzah with us there. They didn't sell matzah at the stadium. So it's really a way to get that message in, the message of humility, message of other-centeredness, to really realize, again, Passover is not the memory of the past, but an historical experience for us to feel engaged with in the year 2011. So matzo ball soup, matzo ball mix, some people like to do it not from a mix, of course, but do it from scratch. Everyone has their own secret recipe. And I can tell you, certainly in my own home, when you go in the house and you start smelling the matzo ball soup, you know it's time for the Seder. One of the things we actually do at the Seder is not only eat matzah, but we also eat romaine lettuce, we eat bitter herbs, we eat horseradish. That's a component of it to re-experience the Exodus as well. What brings difficulty in my life today? How am I going to transcend it? When you go into the aisles, you'll see there's a lot of vegetables as well. The reason why you have a lot of vegetables here is not that all these vegetables are actually used necessarily at the Seder, but they also require special supervision for Passover. Because we have to make sure there's no grains that get in. And many companies, they'll process a lot of things on the same line that they'll process vegetables. So therefore, if they're canned, it's one thing to go into the fresh aisle. Fresh aisle, you can get what you need. That's not an issue. But when it comes to canned products, we have to make sure they actually have special Passover supervision to make sure there's no chametz, no grain products that are in there that could actually be problematic on the holiday. So when these products are actually prepared in the factory, generally what happens is a supervisor goes in, he makes sure all the lines are totally purged. They pour boiling hot water on them to make sure there's no trace of chametz. And then they process this. So you know when you're getting this product, it's totally not only kosher, but also kosher for Passover. None one of the products that you'll find actually at every Seder table is wine or grape juice. In fact, normally in Judaism, we only have 1 cup of wine. But on the holiday of Passover, we have 4 cups of wine. So if you can't take wine, you can use grape juice. But what's the whole idea behind using the wine or the grape juice? Wine and grape juice are also symbols of freedom. It's a way for me to step back a little bit, really to appreciate and enjoy life. But it's also about making sure that we make blessings over things. Make sure that we're grateful to God for everything that we have. That wine can either bring life or bring death. If somebody drinks too much of it, you can, God forbid, become intoxicated, do crazy things. But Judaism teaches us, and our religion says, you have to make sure to sanctify all the things that God gives us for life. That's one of the reasons why we use the grape juice at the Seder. 4 cups of freedom, and make sure we use it to enjoy and to maximize life. When I was growing up in Atlanta, you had to only drink Coke. The question is, what makes something kosher for Passover, particularly like a soda? So one of the restrictions of Passover is that not only can you not have any one of the grains, but also there is a restriction against having anything that is what are called kitniot, different beans, legumes. In that is corn. Corn syrup is a problem. So the way actually they make the kosher for Passover sodas, and actually this originated in Atlanta. There was a rabbi there who was the only person who actually knew the secret recipe for Coca-Cola other than the corporation, because he had to make it kosher, was to do a special line where they take out the corn syrup and they put in sugar for the special kosher for Passover sodas. They've come up with almost everything. If you can't have Cheerios, you can have Crispios. They've come up with many different models for what to have that's kosher for Passover cereal. But again, one of the things to remember is with all the different things that we can have for Passover, it's not necessarily about what we eat, but it's also about what we take inside ourselves. A number of months ago, we started a website called 40 Days to a Better You, which is actually about really finding out how do we go through the holidays and internalize the spiritual messages. So while you're eating your Crispy O's or while you're drinking your Coca-Cola, think about the deeper message of freedom. What am I living for? What am I enslaved to today? How can I bring more freedom to the rest of the world? And God willing, this Passover, and not only be a celebration for you sitting around the Seder table, but also hopefully herald a better time for the entire world speedily in our days. Happy Passover.
The rabbi says that if anyone is seeking to attend a Seder, they should get in touch with him at congregationagudathshalom.org.